everybody. We are live. I'm Duncan Hood, and on behalf of the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race, I want to welcome you all here with us today as we talk with Matt Rutherford. Wave, Matt. Good, Matt. Matt, believe it or not, is all the way down, ooh, nice, in Bogota, Colombia. It's a miracle the electrons can get that far. So Matt, just say hi, and then we'll go through some ground rules for everybody.
All right. Hey, how's it going? Nice to talk to you all tonight.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a chat window up. And as you attend, just type in where you're from, and away we go. I'll start out, and I'll just type Annapolis, Maryland. And here we go. And tonight, as we get moving along here, we're going to have the chats are running. We go, oh, look, we got somebody from Belgium. Woohoo! That's a long way away. And as we get going, you guys are probably going to have questions along the way. As you do, I'm running a question and answer box. Down at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a question and answer button to click. Click that, type your question, and we'll get to it at the end of the chat. So I'm pretty excited now. Matt has got just an amazing background. He is, I think, the only person who has ever sailed from Annapolis up the east coast of the Americas, across and through the Northwest Passage, down the Pacific coast of North and South America, and around Cape Horn. Did you go through the Straits of Magellan or around the Horn, Matt?
No. Went around the Horn.
Dude. And
I couldn't go through the Straits of Magellan. It wouldn't have counted.
Okay, done. And up the East Coast and all the way back to Annapolis. So I see there are a lot of people from all over the place, and thank you for joining us tonight. Matt, I'm going to pass it over to you. And you got the con. Hit your share screen, and away we go, my friend.
All right, just give me a second here.
There we go. Yeah.
Is this working? That's not working.
Not yet.
All right.
There we go.
Do you see that?
I don't see your screen yet. You have a share screen button?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, hit your
Sorry,
share.
I'm technologically impaired here.
Well, it's Bogota, for crying out loud.
I'm working on getting impaired. All right, let's see.
All right, I got your full screen. Start your slideshow, and it's all yours.
All right, how you guys doing? Hope you guys doing well. This is the story of the 2022 Greenland expedition. So there was an expedition before it was about 2 years in a boatyard. I was fortunate enough to get a boat donated to the nonprofit. It was a steel schooner, a Bruce Roberts 65. Technically, it's a Voyager 655. Most Bruce Roberts 65s are a New York 65. They made very few of these boats. Now, the 655 was redesigned by Bruce Roberts in about 1999 by a guy named Zan Rickerson. Zan was from the United States. Zan is a Dutch name. His family came from the Netherlands. This boat was designed by Bruce Roberts, redesigned, becoming a Voyager 650. This is the one and only Voyager 650 ever built because it was a custom design for this guy, Zan. The designs then went to the Netherlands. The Netherlands build some of the best steel boats on planet Earth. They have the ability to roll steel in a way that we really just don't have in the United States. So in the United States, you often see hard chine boats. You don't typically see a steel boat that is rounded like a fiberglass boat.
Right.
And so the plans were sent over to the Netherlands. They were able to roll the metal. They sent it back to a guy named Howdy Bailey, who was in the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay in Norfolk. Howdy was kind of a legendary boat builder in the Chesapeake Bay. He's about 90 years old right now. I saw him maybe a year ago, and he's still doing great. The guy's amazing.
He is.
But yeah. See, you know who Howdy is, Duncan. It's
Absolutely.
So this is the second to last boat he ever built, by the way. And it came to him as a kit from the Netherlands. Now, what Howdy did, which was kind of interesting, is Norfolk is the home of the Atlantic Fleet, which means that's where our Navy, it's like the home of the US Navy. So it's full of naval welders. So if you are a naval welder and you want some overtime, you would go to Howdy Bailey and you would weld up these sailboats. So the boat was redesigned by Bruce Roberts to be a Voyager 650. The plans were sent to the Netherlands to be rolled and kind of created as a kit over there in Holland. And then it was sent to Howdy Bailey and welded by the same people who weld our aircraft carriers and destroyers and submarines and whatnot. Now, the picture you're seeing right now, you can see there's a grill. I guess you can see my little pointer. There's a grill. That's actually a smoker right there. And yeah, she came, there wasn't much to her. She had 60 hours on the engine. She had never sailed ever. So, and had no interior. So I'm just going to go through the expedition before the expedition. So here's just kind of an idea, the forward cabin. This is where the crew sleep. Obviously, this is early on. Now, when we got the boat, this wasn't even there. This was basically an empty space. So this is like halfway through building the interior. Now, if you notice, I have a funny expression on my face because a lot of these pictures come from film. I just kind of took screenshots of footage. So a lot of them I'm coming halfway through saying something. The floor has not been done. The ceiling hasn't been done yet in the picture, but you can kind of get an idea of what we're up against. And then, of course, even in this situation, this was basically an empty room. This was the galley. Now, this big hole you see on this side, this is the engine room. You can actually see part of the engine over here and a bunch of random parts and pieces, a bucket, and some other things. We had to knock this wall out in order to push the galley out far enough. He was originally, Zan was going to make this a workshop. But if you look at most of these center cockpit style boats, the walkway tends to also be the galley. And I don't want it to be a workroom because do you want people walking through the workroom all the time? I mean, workrooms are typically, there's tools and things everywhere. So here's before, here's after. Now this is the same shot. This is the same angle right here and right here. Again, the floor hadn't been done. The ceiling hadn't been done. All this behind me was still a raw, pretty much an empty room at that time. But this is where I lived for 2 years. I lived in that, I lived in that, and I lived in a whole bunch more of it. I basically spent 2 years living in what would be the equivalent of doing a major home renovation in your house where you renovate every single room, or maybe you just build the interior of your house while living in your house. So it was, yeah, it's like, I slept with sawdust in my bed all the time. And I lived in the beautiful metropolitan bustling town of Beale, Maryland, population of 3.5. And yeah, I mean, it's honestly, although being quite remote, and it was also during the pandemic, or at least part of it was, which was another interesting thing because you're stuck living on a boat, on the hard, in a boatyard during a pandemic, during quarantine. But yeah, I had nothing else to do but to work on a boat. So I guess maybe it helped. I don't know. You can see the back of the boat back here. Here's me standing, flying a drone. This is the garage door, as I refer to it. I'm sure there's some nautical term for it of some sort. We call it the garage. And in this space, about 3 feet back, is kind of this garage compartment. It's an area you can get to the quadrant, which I'll be talking about in a little bit when I get to basically some variation of rudder failure on the way to Greenland.
It's a great picture for scale.
Yeah, and also if you see this back here, this was the workshop. So how did we build the interior? Well, that's how we build the interior. So I had a workshop on the back of the boat, and you can see at this point we're doing, these are drawer faces, and this is part of the nav station. These are just various, cabinet doors and things. And so, yeah, I mean, for 2 years, that was it. Me and one woodworker. I will not claim that I am a master carpenter. I will claim that I worked with a guy named Mike Lyons, who is a master carpenter, and I was very fortunate to have his help and at a good rate. He gave me a good rate, much better than what you normally get in the marine industry. And he always showed up on time, which is something you don't normally find in the marine industry. That is not a normal thing. And anybody who's dealt with contractors will know it is hard to get them to show up when they say they're going to show up.
And that's the truth.
So yeah, so there you go. That is the 2 years, the expedition before the expedition. Hold on 1 second. I just want to get a clock here near me so I know where I'm going. All right. So here's the boat before we put her in the water. She got fresh paint on her. This character walking up the staircase is Christy. I'll mention her again later. But at this point, there's still a lot of rigging work that needs to be done. You can see I'm missing the booms. but the pilot house is together. The boat is painted. She got a bottom job. She's getting pretty close at this point. But it was an absolute rush. At this point, I was working somewhere between 18 and 20 hours a day. I would sleep for 4 hours. I'd get up, try to take a shower, spend the first 2 hours doing email because I still run an ocean research organization, and then spend the rest of the day, trying to build the boat so I could do the trip.
Man.
So this is her under sail. This is not in the Chesapeake Bay. You can see in the background, but I just want to throw a picture in there. It's sort of in the evolution of this boat, so you can see where she was later on, and looking pretty good. All right, so we sail out of Annapolis, right? All this work happens, the chaos, the getting the boat ready, the crew. I had a first mate. He was an engineer he was the second engineer on a large research vessel called the Sekuliak that operates in Alaska. And he was a certified diesel mechanic. He was certified in steam engines, which,
wow.
All right, I mean, why not, I guess. But he was a good guy to have on the boat. Unfortunately, he fell down, not this flight of stairs, he fell down the flight of stairs that go down in the garage. While the boat was on the hard, he wore these giant boots, like rubber boots that went up to his knees all the time, and he just lost his grip. He hurt his shoulder. The doctor said, well, hey, I don't think you should go to Greenland. And doctors, I don't know how many times they've rained on people's parades, but they tend to tell people not to do things. Not that I'm a doctor, but I do it anyways.
You play one on TV.
Yeah, I play one on Grey's Anatomy. I'm the newest star. So unfortunately, I lost my first mate right before the trip started. I had to get another first mate. That was sort of the first in a long line of unfortunate little people falling down things. There was a lot of falling down things on this, and none of it had to do with being in the ocean. None of it had to do with sailing. None of it had to do with being in a storm.
Really?
Yeah, it was really strange. But anyways, here it is. I lose my first mate right before we leave. I get a young guy to go on a trip. Yada, yada, yada. So we leave out of Chesapeake Bay, right? Here we are, we're sailing. We're feeling excited. We're going to Greenland. We're going nonstop to Greenland. We're going to try, because we're running out of time. We're already a little bit late just trying to get out of the Chesapeake Bay. We got hydrographers coming. We got scientists coming. We got all this research we have to do in Greenland. We got to get there. So we head out the Delaware Bay, up the Chesapeake, down the Delaware, out in the ocean. We get a couple 100 miles offshore. Now, this is a picture from earlier on, but what happens is my injector pump, one of the lines starts leaking.
Oh.
And it is the line right under my hand. It's this line, actually this guy right here. It's called #1 injector line. Yep. Right here, there's a little fitting. It's like a little nut you turn, and there's this ball looking guy that fits in a hole. And the previous owner thought it would be a good idea to bleed the engine, not just at the bleed screw, which is over here, but also here. You don't need to bleed it here. And in the process of bleeding it, he bent it a little bit. And although it worked for the first while, it only had 60 hours when I got it. Eventually it failed, and it started spewing diesel kind of in this direction towards the door over here. God. Now, on top of that, I was laying in bed. My cabin is on the back of the boat, and I could hear this kind of clunking noise. And I'm thinking, and I'm hoping, laying there, that something has got loose in the garage. We had a variety of things in the garage that were stowed away. And I thought, maybe just, some wasn't tied up well. And at this point, it was blowing about 25 to 30 knots. We're a couple 100 miles offshore. You're getting a proper sea state, a sea state that cannot be replicated in the Chesapeake Bay, because we did do a little bit of, sea trials in the Chesapeake. Yeah. And we had a surveyor survey the boat. But anyways, I go back into the garage where the quadrant is, and you have very good access to the quadrant. And basically, it's not just a quadrant. A quadrant connects to the rudder shaft that obviously connects to the rudder. So you have you can see the rudder shaft, you can see all of it. You can stand right next to it if you want to. And I'm standing there, it's maybe like 2 a.m. It's like the middle of the night. I got a flashlight, and I can see the rudder shaft clunking around inside of that, inside of that, the rudder bearings, basically. And basically what it is the rudder bearings were bad. And not just was my rudder floppy, but my engine was basically useless at this point because I was shooting diesel everywhere. I tried a variety of different things to jury rig the injector, but the issue with that is that you are on the high pressure side of the injector pump. On the other side of the injector pump, it's relatively low pressure. But over here on this side, it is extremely high pressure that works to the injectors that obviously gets into the engine.
Jeez.
So what are you going to do? Obviously, we got to turn around and figure out somewhere to go to get hauled out. Now, I had an issue before this that I haven't mentioned because I only have so much time here. But we had an issue with the propeller shaft vibration. Behind this engine is a transmission, and behind the transmission is something called an aqua drive. That goes to a big plate that is integrated into the boat itself. And then from there, there's an additional shaft that goes down the propeller. Now, the point of this really is two things. The first point is it allows you to have your engine more level. So you don't have to have it at such a slant because, marine diesels don't really like to be slanted. They kind of, your engine is a bit happier if it's level. So the aqua drive allows for some of that variation. So you can have your engine a little more level. But what it also does, which is probably even more important, is this is a 110,000 pound boat. This thing is over 50 tons. And as the propeller, especially to load to get the boat from 0 knots to cruising speed, it creates a good amount of load. The propeller spins. Where is that load going to go? Do you want that load on your motor mounts? Do you want that load? No, you are on the transmission. Yeah. It's better to dissipate the load through the plate that the aqua drive is connected to. So anyways, it was installed wrong. We had to haul out at Jabin's. The point is it was very difficult to get hauled out last minute. Now here we are 200 miles offshore with nothing but a Iridium sat phone, which I don't know if you guys ever used one, but they're constantly cutting out. And I'm trying to find a place to haul out. It was a nightmare. We're running out of power. We can't start our engine. This behind me is another generator. It's a DC generator. It's a single cylinder Kubota, and this is an alternator behind my head. And that also was not working properly. It had, interesting enough, it had a bad injector pump. And it just came that way. So it was quite difficult, but eventually a place called New England Boat Works in Rhode Island will haul me out. So this is us sitting on the hard at New England Boat Works. What is not easy to tell in the picture, this is not my rudder. This is my skeg. This down here is my rudder. You can kind of see this is the bottom of the rudder right here where my cursor is. So we had to drop rudder bearings. I don't understand what happened. And Howdy Bailey is a legendary guy, and I'm certainly not trying to say anything bad about the guy whatsoever. But when I called Howdy Bailey, he said that I've never seen any. There was 4 rudder bearings inside of the boat, from the top to bottom, 4 of them. There should have been 2 of them. There should have been 1 on the bottom, 1 on the top. He said, I've never seen anything like it in my life. We don't put 4 bearings in a boat. I never would have done that ever. Yada, yada, yada. And of course, Howdy's like a legend. So, I'm not trying to question Howdy. At the same time, he built the boat. I don't know what happened that day. I don't know if he wasn't involved in that part of it. Yeah. It really is irrelevant because any kind of pointing fingers is not going to get you anywhere at this point anyway. So I did learn one important lesson. Most people use Delrin for bearings. The problem with Delrin bearings is that Delrin will swell in the water. So you have to somehow calculate the exact amount of swelling that's going to happen so you can overcompensate when you for the tolerance when you cut out the middle of what they call a blank, this big blank of Delrin. Yeah. So there's been all sorts of issues, and maybe that was part of the issue. I could also see that some of the bearings were not completely lined up properly. And regardless, there's a new product called Visconite. Lyman Morris in Maine, who's one of the great boat builders in America, have switched to Visconite in the last couple of years. A lot of freighters are making bearings, smaller ones, I guess, out of Visconite, smaller freighters, that is. But anyways, they're used in a lot of commercial applications. The beauty of Visconite is it does not swell. So you can get the exact tolerance of the shaft of the rudder and then take just a tiny bit more, because you don't want to be too tight, but you can fine tune it much better. So I was able to get Visconite from Lyman Morris in Maine. It was a blank. It is sent to New England Boat Works. They had the machinery capabilities to take my old rudder bearings and make new ones. But it was an absolute frustrating thing because again, we're late. We're trying to get to Greenland.
Yeah,
We already were held up by that other issue. And we got to get there. We got to get there. So I'm like pulling my hair out. This is the first expedition on the new boat. I mean, we've been around for 10 years. We've been in Greenland in 2015, 2016, 2018. So we've been up there a few times in the past doing research, but it's almost like the organization is going into a new chapter or maybe even a new book. This is like part 2, the Empire Strikes Back, if I'm going to name a good sequel. Good thing it didn't end that way, because I think Empire Strikes Back ended with like Luke getting his hand cut off. Was that the second one?
Well, better that chapter than chapter 11, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of the other ones sucked, unfortunately. But I like Rogue One. That was okay. So anyways, it was important that this particular expedition came off very successful because we had a lot of partners involved, a lot of new partners, scientific partners, and we needed to prove ourselves. And if you screw up, they're not going to give you another chance. So there's no mulligans. But you can see the bottom of the boat here pretty well. You can see what I'm talking about not being a hard chine boat. She has the lines of a fiberglass boat, and that is thanks to the Dutch.
It's amazing.
All right, so there was another issue. When we first came into to get to this place, and this place is about 9 miles up a river. It's north of Newport, Rhode Island. And we get in there, the engine's broke. The towboat US guy refuses to tow me. So he says it's too early in the morning. I will not be getting towboat US again. And I guess sea tow will be my new thing. But anyways, we sail up the river and we notice, well, the depth sounder was working before we left.
Oh God.
But it's not working now. And why is that? I got no time to worry about a depth sounder right now. I got too many other issues. I got rudders and engines and all this other stuff I got to deal with. So I did call the tech support at Ray Marine while sailing up the river, trying not to, hit things and run aground. And they said I had replaced the transducer with a brand new transducer. It's an extremely large transducer. This transducer is absolutely critical for the expedition because we lower probes, and we lower these probes sometimes thousands of feet down. The one CTD probe you'll see a picture of later is an $80,000 probe. And if you bounce it off a rock in the bottom of a fjord in Greenland, we don't own it. They're not going to be very happy about it. And we'll never get another piece of equipment from this company called RBR. Actually, there's a guy named Dong Legong, who is a scientist. But nevertheless, we're not going to get any of their equipment again if we break it, So we need to know how deep it is going to thousands of feet so we don't bounce probes off rocky seafloors. And Greenland is very, very rocky in the seafloor.
Yeah.
So what they said at first, I had something called a DMS 300, which is an older style sounder module. And they said, well, look, you need one of these guys, a CP 370. And the CP 370 is a 1kW unit. This is like what gives the muscle. This is like the muscle behind the giant, transducer.
And it's not
and so, okay. So I get a CP 370, you can see $863 and get it flown in, and I install it while I'm doing the rudder bearings, while I fix the engine injector lines, and while I'm doing everything else, which is fine, whatever. It's not that hard to install. We put the boat in the water and it doesn't fix the problem. I still have a busted system. So I'm calling Ray Marine. Now I go down to Newport, which is, like 6 miles south down the river. And I'm calling them from anchor, and actually I'm calling them as I'm trying to anchor and dodge boats. And they're like, oh, well, if it's not the CP 370, then it must be your Airmar transducer. Well, Airmar makes transducers for everybody, and Airmar makes an excellent product. If you have a Ray Marine or a Simrad or a B&G or whatever it is, Garmin, they're all made by the same company. They're all made by Airmar. And this is one of the beefiest ones they make. So, okay, I just installed this 2 months ago. You're telling me that my 2-month-old, all right, Ray Marine, if that's what you say, well, what does that mean? That means I got to get hauled out again. Well, guess what? I can't get hauled out again at New England Boat Works. They honestly, they were very nice and they were very great, but they were a bit surprised because there was like 7 of us on the boat and we were all living aboard on the hard. And it was a very fancy pants sort of marina, which is great for them. I don't mean that in any bad way. But, we had a 100-foot oyster next to us at one point and a 100-foot swan, 100 feet away. So it's not really a marina. They want a bunch of people living hard. So we had to go. We got to go. All I could do is fix this along the way. All I could do is keep moving and try to fix this. And where am I going to go? Well, let's go to the beautiful town of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. Obviously, this is not my picture, but I was on anchor in a similar area to where this picture was taken.
Yeah.
Now, you can't get hauled out in Lunenburg. You see anything around here? You see a freaking place that's going to haul a 50-ton boat or a 54-ton boat? No. So we check in Lunenburg. I have no idea where we're going. We just got to find something with a lift big enough. So we end up going to this spot right here, which is about a 2.5, 3-hour ride, motoring, whatever, sailing, however you want to get there. Into here is a little travel well. We tied off to this dock. It was the opposite of New England Boat Works. At New England Boat Works, we came in with a broken engine. They hip tied a dinghy to my boat and then pulled me in that way. I had to back the boat because they couldn't steer the boat with the dinghy. It was too big of a boat. So I just backed it for, I don't know, it was quite a ways, but it wasn't a problem. The boat has a big rudder. It does back quite well, even with bad rudder bearings. Oh. So it was blowing about 30 knots that day. And instead of having, New England Boat Works had like 20 guys ready to catch our lines that day. They had 2 guys, and one guy was running the lift and the other guy was standing on the dock, just kind of standing there. Oh, so man. It was kind of like, if you were to go to like a really fancy car wash and they're like buffing your car and you go in, you get a cup of coffee and they're like cleaning everything. They're like an army of people. Or going to one of those chintzy car washes where you feed the quarters into the machine and you got like the wand and you're like spraying it on your car. This was the haul out equivalent of that happening.
Now, are you near Halifax at this point?
No, near as a relative term. I'm a couple hundred miles, I believe, from Halifax at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. Lunenburg is like southeast, basically. Mm-hmm. It's the first place on the southeast coast you can check into, as far as I'm aware of. Yeah. And the checking in was kind of weird. That's another story. This is a 50-ton lift. The thing is that there was another place called Harchees that tried to haul us in that old debacle I was talking about with the Aqua Drive and everything. And they had alarms that worked on their 50-ton lift. And I told them, you're probably not going to get me up. They got me about halfway up and their machine went bananas. Oh. Well, this 15-ton lift had broken alarms. So they just hauled me anyways. And the whole thing was creaking and everything. I thought the machine was going to break. I am pretty sure I know the driver was quite intoxicated, but he just smoked a lot of weed at that point. But it was just bad. It is legal there, but anyways, probably shouldn't be smoking and lifting boats. I had him bring me to right about here where the travel lift is, and I said, "Stop! There's a little incline here. Just keep me here." Whoop, sorry. Just keep me here on the hard, and whatever, and so whatever, I took a sledgehammer, I knocked out that old transducer. It was very difficult to get another one of these transducers because it's the 260 SS or the 260B. Yeah. They make very few of these transducers because nobody in the world wants one because they're so big and they're not like a high definition fish finder. They're like a big, bulky, they're made to see as deep as humanly possible. That's why I got it. I'm not trying to find fish. You can see fish with them, but I'm trying to see as deep as possible. So it was really hard just to get one last minute, but I knocked one out with a sledgehammer. I didn't know all that 5200. I was afraid with the 5200 that it might not come out easy, but it did. It did come out.
Yeah.
Maybe about an hour and a half. We popped one out. We put a bunch of 5200. We stuck the next one back in there, strapped it down with the bolt on the top, and bam, Bob's your uncle. I was exhausted at this point. I had not slept for many days very well coming up. I had a very exhausting time just in Rhode Island. And then the passage from Rhode Island to Nova Scotia wasn't difficult, but because it was a new boat in the ocean for everybody, I'm the captain. The crew is somewhat untested. I had to be awake a lot to make sure, everything was okay. So we're sitting on the hard, basically where this travel lift is. And if you can see over here on the screen where my little arrow is, this is a seawall. Now, right about there is a fire pit. So some people made a fire. and you can see it from the boat. It's getting dark. And my crew and everybody else on the boat wanted to go down and hang out near the fire pit. Well, I was completely exhausted to
Yeah.
such an extent. It was like, look, I'm just going to bed. It was like 9 o'clock. And I'm like, I can't deal with this. I'm going to bed. Well, about, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night that night, Christy, who was going up the stairs earlier in that picture, fell off the seawall about 9 feet and broke her arm in 3 places. So I get woken up at about 5 in the morning to Nick, one of my crew, saying, hey, you got to get up, you got to check this out. My first thought was like, what in the hell are you doing in my cabin at 5 in the morning? I'm trying to get some sleep. And then I was like, oh my God, there must be something wrong, or else you wouldn't be here. So I came out, her arm was so swollen that her knuckles looked like dimples. Nick had tried to reset her broken arm. She's tough. She's as tough as they come. I mean, I totally give it. And instead of being like crying, she cackles. She's one of these people, like if you give her pain, she laughs. But anyways, it was too broken. I said, look, man, Christy, you got to go to the hospital and get x-rays. Like that looks way too, like I started unwrapping it. Nick was a professional fighter. He was a cage fighter for about 15 years. And so he can wrap a broken bone. I mean, the guy's seen all sorts of injuries.
Yeah.
I got about halfway through unwrapping the arm. I just stopped, like, you got to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we went back to Lunenburg while they're in the hospital. And unfortunately, it came back that she had a broken arm. And so unfortunately, it was broke. She had to go back to the United States to get a titanium plate installed in her arm. So she was gone. We lost one of our sailors. We normally have 4 sailors. Now we're down to 3. So we sail out of, this picture is from Greenland, but I'm using it for reference because Nick and I were on watch that night. The first night out of Lunenburg. All right, we're all sad. We lost Christy. It was, it was a very depressing situation at the time. We're all really bummed out about it.
Yeah.
And we, Nick and I are on watch. Maybe it's 2 in the morning. Nick puts on a podcast about the history of the Eastern campaign. What do they call it? The Pacific War of World War II. When the United States fought the Japanese. So we're listening to this podcast, hearing about whatever, Iwo Jima or whatever it is. And I start feeling really like cold and sweaty at the same time. And I'm just getting this weird, and it's just my butt like is like I'm uncomfortable. Like I'm just deteriorating quick. And by the end of the watch, I'm basically curled up in a ball in the cockpit. And Nick takes a little gun, those like COVID guns, the heat sensor guns, shoots me in the mouth, and I'm 104. Now, wow. I don't know if I was 103 or 104, but I was definitely 100 and something, and I was sick, but there was not much we could do. What happened is I had, I believe, COVID. Woo, there goes COVID.
Oh God.
Now, I did not go to Lunenburg much after Christy and stuff, but my crew, they wanted to get off the boat. They wanted to check out the town. I was too busy trying to work on the boat and keep things moving so we could sail to Greenland. Somebody brought back COVID. Trevor, one of the crew, got sick for about half a day. Nicole got sick. This was the day before, but they didn't get, we were all vaccinated. Everybody on the boat is vaccinated. So it kind of like bounced off of them. They got sick, but it was just such a mild sort of thing that nobody really thought much about it. It's like Trevor just laid down and took a nap. He woke up, he felt better. Nicole felt a little down for a little bit. Well, my immune system had been basically destroyed because I hadn't slept much in weeks at this point. And so I was really struggling. I don't know. I guess I just trashed myself. So I think COVID, even though I was vaccinated, was able to take hold of me pretty well. Yeah. So I was bedridden for the next about 5 days. And I quarantined myself, and I had a VHF, and I had an iPad that had a link to the chart plotter. These chart plotters have these kind of Wi-Fi links, and you can get an app. So I could see what was on the chart plotter in the pilot house. I could get the VHF, and I could tell them, hey, turn 10 degrees to starboard or whatever it is. But we were lucky because we had very light winds at the time. So it wasn't like we're doing any, we weren't going through a lot of storms. Either we were sailing in beautiful conditions or motoring along. So it was relatively pleasant. Eventually my fever broke. My bed got covered in sweat, like some kind of swamp. It was quite disgusting. And it took me another couple of weeks before I tasted proper. Coffee tasted bad for like 2 weeks, and I love coffee. So there was some storms and stuff crossing the Labrador Sea, but eventually we got to Greenland. Now this is the entrance to Pamiet in Greenland. Obviously, it is some kind of old fishing boat that has been there for a long time, and as a reminder, you better be careful where you go in Greenland, because you do not want to run aground or you're going to wind up like this guy.
Yeah.
Pamiet at one point had the largest fishing fleet in Greenland until the fishing fleet got shut down, mostly by the Danish government overnight. Greenland is controlled by Denmark, although it is pretty independent since the late 1980s, but still, a lot of policy comes from Denmark. So it was a town that went from 5,000 to like 800 people very quickly. It actually reminds me quite a bit of some of the places I'm from originally in the Rust Belt of the Midwest. There are many towns like this in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania that disappeared, industry shut down, and they disappeared kind of overnight. But anyways, we're here. We're in Greenland. Finally, we're late. We're late a bit. So we had to rearrange our schedule. We ended up staying a bit longer in Greenland because of it. We were going to do couple of weeks of this glacier research, then the seafloor mapping. Glacier research, we had to jump straight into the seafloor mapping.
Have you got any scientists arriving at this point?
Yeah, we got this. So basically, if you see this picture, here's Nicole. Nicole is the scientist for Ocean Research Project. She is our primary chief scientist. This whole thing, all the research is spearheaded by her. And this guy over here, Christian, is her marine technician. And Christian was there from Annapolis all the way to right before we left. He ended up getting a job, like a really good job on a big research vessel in a laboratory that people his age, he's like 22, people his age don't normally get it. And so all of us were like, dude, you got to leave. You got to take this job. Like, because somebody basically had to quit and there was a vacancy. It was just a fluke, and we're all like promoting it, doing everything we can to get this guy the job because it's an amazing opportunity for a young guy. This guy is Daniel, and I'll show you more pictures in a minute. He's one of the hydrographers. So at this point, yes, we had hydrographers flying in. We had a hydrographer flying in from Israel. We had a hydrographer flying in from Brazil to help with the seafloor mapping. This is just a hydrographers basically are experts in mapping the seafloor. That's their job is to map the seafloor. And this is the device that we use this is the transducer. You bring it up to get it out of the ice, depending on how much ice. Sometimes you flip it all the way around up on deck if it was bad enough, or if you're like in the ocean. But this thing is called a mega tower. Just this thing alone is about $40,000. Just this mega tower. This guy down here is about $300,000. So you could buy like a Lamborghini with the price of this thing down here. Science is very expensive, to say the least. So this is just a close-up. These are the transducers on a multi-beam sonar. So if you want to think about a single beam sonar, like the one I was talking about that we had to pound out of the boat. Oh, I didn't finish that story, by the way. We left out of Nova Scotia. We still didn't have a depth sounder. And we flew another three-piece CP370 to one of the seafloor mappers with the hope that the one we got out of the box, brand new, was broken, brand new out of the box. And I didn't have a lot of faith in it, and we plugged it in, and it worked. So basically, the long and short of that entire story of having to get hauled out, where I lose the crew, I get COVID, all this bad stuff happens. All of it happened is because I got a bad CP370 from Raymarine, brand new in the box. And all it did to take, and their tech support said, "Oh no, that wouldn't happen. You wouldn't get a bad one from the factory." So they blamed the transducer. Well, the transducer was probably fine. And that transducer was like $1,500. I destroyed a $1,500 transducer that probably worked perfectly fine and hauled out, cost thousands of dollars to haul out, lost one of my crew, got COVID, all because of a stupid, broken Raymarine product. Anyways, that thing is a single beam. A single beam shoots one beam. It goes down, it bounces, it comes back up, it tells you the depth. This guy that you're looking at right here has 1,029 beams. And one of them sends and one of them receives. And they're in this T formation. This is a very normal formation for a multi-beam sonar. One is to send, one is to receive. And because it has 1,029 beams, it's like a swath. If you can imagine the wall in your house, you have a wall somewhere near you right now. If you were to paint that wall and I were to hand you a little artist watercolor brush, or I were to hand you a big paint roller, obviously you would paint it with the paint roller. This is the equivalent of that. Not just that, but it paints the image of the seafloor in 3D, where you can use the single beam. In 2016, we mapped an area half the size of the Chesapeake Bay, about 1,200 miles of going back and forth, and it was 800 miles from the North Pole, way further than this. And we were able to take that single beam data and create a 3-dimensional model from that data. So I'm not saying you can't make a 3-dimensional model with a single beam. I'm just saying it's a lot more work. It's like painting the wall in your house with that tiny little brush. It's a lot, but it's hard to get a $300,000 multi-beam. And Nicole is the one who is able to convince this company to let us borrow it because we don't have the money to buy it. All right, so you can see us underway. We have now deployed this. We were mapping the seafloor at this point. And this is basically, what she looks like moving along underway. So this was near Pamiat. Beautiful area, by the way. I mean, these mountains are about 3,000 feet tall. And it's really hard to get scale, but you're surrounded by them in all directions. Beautiful colored water too. It's like a nice turquoise color, very pretty. Sometimes the fjords in Greenland, here's the boat down here in the bottom corner. You can see there's not much ice in here. There's a little bit of ice over here somewhere, but it's not too bad. So sometimes it's, the fjords are not too icy. Sometimes, here's a boat. Sometimes they're icier. It just depends. Sometimes some of the fjords, like one that Nicole nicknamed the ice machine, was so heavy we couldn't even get in it. I mean, we got in it, but we could only barely get in there. And it would have taken us like a month to do any mapping because there's so much ice. Plus, we need to do something different this year. We need to put a transducer, that big transducer you saw, in the hull, flush mounted. And if we can put it in the hull, we can do it flush mounted, we can push through ice without it being up front. The reason why you see it up front is because it needs clean water. If you put it on the back of the boat, the propeller creates turbulence, and that turbulence is going to affect its ability to work properly. So you need to put it somewhere, where it can be clean water and not being affected by the boat pretty much in any way. But you can imagine with ice, I mean, it's very vulnerable to ice. So you had to be very careful. You're mapping around here. I mean, there's all sorts of ice all over the place. And so we had to be very cautious with that. Even though it had a function to brake, every time we broke this, what they call a breaker bar, it was $500. Every breaker bar was $500. And every time we broke one, it cost another $500. And we only had so many.
Yeah.
So here's the hydrographers. This guy is Tomer. He's a guy from Israel. This guy is Daniel. He's from Brazil. And we kind of turned the pilot house into like a bit of a, I don't know, office-ish, lab-ish space. So you'd always have a hydrographer out there. We operate 24 hours a day during this time period. And then there's somebody driving the boat. It was more complicated because we lost Christy. If we had a 4-man team for sailors, then we would have 2 people on watch at a time. But because of that, we couldn't always have 2 people on watch. There was a point, well, here you can see Nicole before I tell the next story. Here's Nicole doing some hydrography. She also can do hydrography work. And here's her later on, whatever, taking some notes from some of the stuff she's doing. So pretty early on, within the first few days of mapping the seafloor, one thing that happens, the first day people are around ice, they're pretty cautious. Second day, they're a little less cautious. By the third, fourth day, unfortunately, hubris can get the best of people at some level. And it was a combination of one of the crew members. He liked to tell stories, and that's fine. But he would start paying attention to the story more than what was in front of him. We were not in heavy ice, because if we were in heavy ice, we'd still make somebody stand on the front of the boat with a VHF trying to help direct the person in the pilot house steer around whatever ice. And he was going about 6.5 knots, and he was telling some story, not paying attention. He hit a chunk of ice about the size of a Cadillac Escalade, which blew the iceberg into a million pieces. It did nothing to the hull. Our hull can blast through ice. It's a steel boat. The boat was originally made to go to the Arctic. So that was another layer that I didn't even tell you earlier. It was designed and reinforce, particularly for the Arctic. I don't know why. It's funny because that guy who built half built the boat, and then he abandoned the boat for 18 years before we got it. I talked to him and I said, hey man, when I finish this boat, why don't you come and meet us in Greenland? Like, I would love to take. He's like, oh man, it's too cold. I'm like, it's too cold. You built a boat for the Arctic. What are you talking about? It's too cold. So unfortunately, the guy had a stroke not long after, and he lost most of his mental facilities. I was never able to show him the finished boat, which is really sad. I would have loved to have shown him the finished product, but he doesn't even know who has the boat. I know somebody who knows him, and he's just, unfortunately, unfortunately, he's got like dementia or something at this point.
Sad thing.
But anyways, the guy was telling a story, hit the ice, blasted the ice to a bunch of pieces. One of those pieces went under the boat, hit the prop, bent one of the blades. Now I got a vibration issue again. I had a vibration issue in the beginning. It was driving me crazy. It was so hard to get hauled out. Well, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Now, it also chipped one of it. I made the guy jump overboard in the ice cold water without any protection. We didn't have any, we had with a pair of goggles on and go down and look. And he came up very happy. Oh yeah, it's chipped. It's like, all right, well, whatever. At least we know what it is.
Yeah.
But now we can motor at about 4.5 knots. The flip side is 4.5 knots isn't a bad speed for mapping the seafloor with a multi-beam in deep water, because it gives you don't really want to go over 5.5 anyways. You could push 6 knots with this multi-beam, but if you go too fast, you might get a distorted image of the seafloor. So going 4.5 knots, it gave us a clearer picture of the seafloor, but obviously it inhibited us. Now I got to get hauled out again. Where am I going to get hauled out? I'm in the middle of nowhere in Greenland, and we're in the middle of mapping the seafloor. So anyways, keep that in mind. So here's some images of the seafloor. This was completely uncharted beforehand. We mapped all this stuff. What you're seeing here is pretty much the surface of the fjord. So this is kind of the water line, more or less. And you can see it. There's some shoal up here and over there. And then here's another image from the top of a what we call a fjord, because there was a fjord that split 3 pieces. And this was quite an active glacier in this one. And I think all the silting that has happened over time has filled this one in quite a bit. Where this one, the glacier was completely disappeared. And this one, it was half there and half not there. It was kind of run up on land. But if you see this in the middle, this black spot, this is an island. So just to give you some reference, this island right here is this island right here. This is the same island. This island is this black spot right there. So, and this wasn't a bad anchorage. You can see we're on anchor, but sometimes ice, there's a lot of ice coming out over here. It'll come around the corner sometimes and you get caught up in the boat if you weren't careful. The very common thing in anchoring in Greenland is that, you're anchoring amongst the ice. And even though in this picture, you don't see a lot of it, it's other times of the day, depending on the current, you can have a lot of it. And you just have to live and learn with anchoring with ice and current. It's just a thing.
Yeah. Crazy.
So to get a little more detail about mapping the seafloor, we're not mapping the seafloor for navigation purposes, because people aren't really navigating in here. Why would somebody navigate in here anyways? This has nothing to do with mining or oil or any of that kind of stuff. There's no oil up there anyways. And although there is some potential for mining in Greenland, that happens on land. That doesn't happen underwater. The purpose of the seafloor mapping is to understand the story of the glaciers in the fjord. A hydrographer or a trained scientist can look at some of these images that I showed you earlier, and they can see the movement of the glacier through the thousands of years since the last glacial maximum, which is the last ice age, to today. And there are signs within the rocks and the formations, which to me and you, I'm not, to an untrained eye, it's hard to see much, honestly. But these guys can understand the various ridges and the various marks that show how the glacier was moved. And you can see some of it just in this aerial footage of various areas that it's moved through. And it basically helps to tell part of the story of the history of a glacier in a way that we obviously can't see today. So our purposes for mapping, now the Seabed 2030 is who we are mapping for. That's the United Nations initiative that wants to map all the last uncharted areas of planet Earth by 2030, which is pretty ambitious. And so to them, they don't, whatever, they just want it mapped just because they're tired. Basically, United Nations is tired of stuff not being mapped. They're like, hey, we're in the 21st century. We should have this. We should have all of it mapped by now. You cannot map this with satellites, by the way. We do not have satellites. The best satellites that NASA have can only map down through about 10, 15 feet of water. So these are thousands of feet deep, these fjords. So they just can't do it. So anyways, that's why we're mapping. So before I get into that, I don't have a picture of this, but we ended up going to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, which is a couple hundred, 200-300 miles north of this. And we were able to get hauled out using something called a railway. It's like a train track with like this cradle looking thing. And I was able to pull the prop off. They beat on it with a hammer, welded a little piece in there. We stuck it back on the boat and more or less problem solved. It wasn't perfect. We still had some vibration in there, but it was a lot better. We can now go, 6 knots instead of, 4.5 while motoring. So there you go. Now, underneath of a glacier, there is melted water from the glacier. It's basically, you can think of it as a river that is under the glacier. And this river carries sediment because as the glacier moves along, it is chewing up the earth and chewing up everything, underneath of it. And it creates obviously canyons. We know of a lot of features that were created during the last ice age by glaciers. Within this sediment are nutrients. These nutrients are critical for plankton and for various parts of the ecosystem. So plankton is kind of like a phytoplankton in particular. It's like a cornerstone. It's like the foundation of your house, chain. And also, once these glaciers become completely landfast, this is an example I have in here of a glacier that you can see the land here. This one is like half in the water and half on land. And of course, it goes on for a long distance in either direction. This is just one picture, but this is the river that normally would be underneath of the glacier. And you can see it starting to poke out because this glacier is just now beginning to become landfast. It's just now beginning to lose its healthy ice shelf. And it looks like a waterfall, but that is, the river that comes out of the glacier. And here's an example of a glacier that is retreated back onto land. Now, if you follow this glacier up, you can see they're like a river. They're like a frozen river. It goes all the way back up to the Greenland ice cap. And some of these where this comes completely, all this melts away. If you go to a fjord where this has been completely retreated, all you have is a muddy river. I mean, you got to think about it as a Goldilocks situation in some ways like our planet Earth. If our planet Earth was any closer to the sun, it would be too hot. If it was any further away, it would be too cold. Well, when it comes to the sediment and the nutrients within these fjords, if these glaciers are too melted, they put in just muck. It's like just muddy water into the fjord, and the fjord just becomes completely brown. You cannot have photosynthesis. It is just mud water. I mean, nothing really can live in mud water. It's not good for the fish. It's not good for anything. But and then the flip side, if you don't have anything in that fjord, then you're not getting any nutrients. So nature balances itself, and nature has created balances through thousands of years within the glaciers, and glaciers have come and gone as we've had various ice ages, but none of this happens quickly within the lifespan of a human. And the balance of the nature is this perfect Goldilocks zone where you're getting just the right amount of sediment with just the right amount of nutrients in order to sustain plankton and sustain, the ecosystem itself within the polar regions.
Yeah.
So this is a healthy glacier. Just to give you an example of what this is a healthy glacier. It's got an ice shelf that extrudes out. Now, if you can kind of notice, this water here is a darker color. You can see it's kind of bluer here. This is where that river is coming out. You can see the sediment in the water right over here. So anyways, this is a nice, healthy guy. I'm sure it's retreating. I imagine we come back in a few years, it'll probably be on land because they're all retreating quickly. This guy, a few years ago was about a kilometer out within the fjord, had like a kilometer ice shelf, and now it's on land. So I mean, these things have retreated dramatically just in the last few years. We hiked on this thing, and just a couple of years ago, we looked at Google Earth. I mean, we'd been in the middle of a glacier, so they're moving quick.
Wow.
Okay, so this is Nicole. This is the $80,000 probe I was talking about, that if we bounce it off the seafloor, it would be a very bad thing. That's why we needed that transducer so badly. You would lower this first off for seafloor mapping to understand sound velocity. The amount of sediment in a fjord is going to create a different type of sound velocity, or is going to change the ability of sound to travel through the water. So this thing helps us understand sound velocity, which we then can program the multi-beam with. We do it every 4 hours. We have to reprogram it for sound velocity so we can paint that image of the seafloor in proper detail. This is also very good for a wide variety of scientific scientific objectives. It is a CTD, thus conductivity, temperature, and depth. We used it 2016 when we were chasing a warmer, saltier water column that's coming up from Greenland and eating their glaciers from underneath. You can lower this and you can see the warmer water column. You can verify how much warmer it is. You can see what the salinity levels are within it. So it's really like a Swiss Army knife of scientific instruments where you can use it for a lot of different purposes. And here this was a pot puller from the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. Crab fishermen use it to raise and lower crab pots. We just modified it. And we also are doing some mud samples. You can see Christian and Nicole, and Nicole's got a sample full of mud. This is tells us basically the history of the seafloor, of the muck in the seafloor, going back to about 15,000 years. So one core sample can go back, about 15,000 years, and all of it has to get processed in labs. You have to be stored properly in special refrigerating, freezing devices, which we had on a boat, which takes a lot of power. But anyways, it's important to get verification. It's one thing to map the seafloor and see like, okay, here's where the glacier has moved. It's another thing to have physical samples of that area. This is a Niskin bottle. Niskin bottles you lower to various depths and you collect water samples. So we'd collect a water sample at the seafloor, we'd collect one in the middle, and we'd collect one at the surface. And again, these are more verifications. All these samples get analyzed. Here's us filtering. This is a filtering into bottles. We had about 600 of these when we were done. They all go back to a laboratory, a Horn Point laboratory, and they have to process the samples to actually see what exactly is going on. We had a whole flow-through system I don't have pictures of that had about $200,000 worth of sensors in it, where water would come through a through hull, flow through all these different sensors, and then go back out another through hull. Wow. And that was taking samples. So, you want to be able to get physical samples. Water samples, mud samples. These are physical samples that need to be processed in a lab that give like physical verification. But you also want to have sensor-based sampling, and you want to have seafloor mapping. It's like a collage. It's like all these elements come together that will tell you what's going on within that fjord and the history of that fjord, and ultimately the health of that glacier. And this is a waterfall sampler. Here's Trevor. Sometimes we sample. This was always fun, by the way. There's waterfalls all over the place up there, and it was always fun to like jump in a dinghy and blast over and get a waterfall sample. There's also probes that we lowered that would talk to satellites. This guy, we called it the buoy. It's about $100,000, but it talked to satellites, and the satellites were looking down at the fjords while it was taking readings of that water, and sending it up to the satellite. This is something called ocean color. Ocean color is sort of the genre within science. And this is another aspect of understanding the amounts of sediment within that fjord. Sometimes you gotta have fun. So sometimes I'd break out the turntables and I would spin some records. They're over there lowering probes and stuff. Because, hey, man, I mean, you got to do something sometimes.
I'm saying what, man?
Yeah. And there's the boat. We sailed back from Greenland. I don't know if you guys remember Hurricane Fiona. It hit southern Newfoundland really badly last year. We were in Newfoundland. We had to duck and hide from the hurricane. We had another hurricane, but it wasn't near Ian. But we didn't have such an issue with that. Coming back wasn't much of an issue because we sorted out a lot of the problems by this point. There were some other issues that I'm working through this winter, but generally speaking, we were able to get back down without too many problems, except for that Hurricane Fiona that we tied off to a shrimp boat that was tied off to a seawall in a place called Port au Choix, Nova Scotia. And we had good protection and got us into a good, safe place. We had no damage. So it really wasn't too big of a crazy story, but it was a pretty big hurricane. And we were able to get through a patch. And then we got back to Annapolis after about, 120 days. And Nicole has an expedition. I told you about my expedition before the expedition, building the boat. Well, Nicole had an expedition after the expedition, which is processing the samples. So we're going to do our best in the future to try to allocate more funding for processing samples, because 3 inches of one of those mud core samples can cost $500 to process, just 3 inches of it. And we have lots and lots and lots of, we have many feet to say the least. So, we're working to try to figure out ways to take a little pressure off Nicole, because we're heading back to Greenland 2023, mid-May. And we're going to do an expedition that's even longer. We'll be up there in another extra month and even more ambitious. But we need to do it in a way that doesn't overload our scientists. And luckily, we've worked out a lot of the kinks. And there are berths for sale. By the way, if you go to oceanresearchproject.org, we're only selling berths sailing to Greenland and sailing back from Greenland. When we are actually in Greenland doing research, it's impossible to sell berths. You can't do it. The science is, it's just, there's no way it can possibly work out. The science dominates everything 24 hours a day. Every single place we go is because of the science. Everything we do is because of the science. So it just doesn't, it can't make sense. But if you want to check out the website, you can check that out. I have a podcast called the Single-Handed Sailing Podcast. You can listen to that if you want to. And there you go, Ocean Research Project.
Well done, Matt. This is the sign of 2 hands clapping.
Yes, very good.
Hey,
Questions, please.
If you guys have any questions, this is the time to put them up on the Q&A. Matt, you should be able to see your Q&A by clicking the button at the bottom of the screen, Q&A.
Should I stop sharing here? Would that be better?
Yeah, you can do that. Absolutely.
Okay.
So stop your share. There you go. But
Q&A, I got it. All right, let me touch.
it's okay. We've got quite a few that have been put in the chat as well. So
Well, I don't know. Yeah, you want to pick them, man? Why don't you pick them and ask them?
I'll pick them out. Let's go.
I'll be here all
First of
day
all,
if there's 54.
Is that Nicole Trenholm?
Oh, yeah. That's Nicole.
Okay.
Nicole has been around since the beginning of the, I started the organization. I didn't know Nicole, but Nicole got involved very early on. And she has been an instrumental part on the scientific side of the organization. She's basically the captain. I'm the captain of the boat. She's the captain of science. We both have our responsibilities. And, I try to give her as much freedom as I can to let her do what she got to do. And when we get up to Greenland, in some ways, she's like the king because, the science rules.
She's running the world. She's running the world.
Yeah, and I'm just, yes,
hey, here's
yes,
another
ma'am.
one. Mike Morrissey wants to know, what's the repository to know what is mapped and what isn't, or what areas were most recently mapped?
Okay, well, so there is information out there to determine what areas, we're talking Greenland in particular. If you want to talk like the open ocean in particular, most of the open ocean has not been mapped. Most of what you see are models created by Marie Tharp. Our vessel is called Marie Tharp. We named our boat after the woman who created. Actually, if you look behind me, you can see right here, these are Marie Tharp's maps. All these continental ridges and all these bumps.
Seriously.
These came from single beam. And like I told you earlier, you can take single beam data and you can create 3-dimensional models. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's going to be pretty damn accurate. For the open ocean, like over here, it's like whatever. It doesn't have to be exact. But they are trying to change that. Now, when it comes to Greenland, Greenland has only really been starting to be mapped since 2015. That was the first year. And there was a NASA program called Ocean Melting Greenland. 2015, 2016, that's who we were working with, was this NASA program out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory on the West Coast of the United States. And because of the sort of recent aspects to it, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy to know what's mapped and unmapped, but we have connections with NASA still. So Nicole talks to our NASA connections. NASA knows every place that hasn't been mapped, and they tell us, well, hey, here's the areas. but it's not that simple. Just because an area is unmapped doesn't mean anything in particular. We need to know what are the areas of importance to the glacier research. So these are areas with active glaciers or inactive glaciers that are creating that mud, that mucky water. And so we can compare and contrast between the different types of sea bottoms created by the different scenarios within the glaciers.
Excellent. So here's another question for you. Is the data owned by Denmark since you were in their waters? And did you have a lot of trouble getting the permissions to work in Greenland waters?
First off, Greenland, there is permit process that needs to happen in Greenland, and it's a little bit drawn out, but it's not that bad. There are sections of Greenland called the reserve. There's section, can't see it here, it's too far north. But anyway, there's in the reserve areas, these are like nature reserves. It's extremely hard to get permission, but these areas are kind of few and far between. So we weren't in them. And so now the Canadian Arctic is much more difficult. We hope to do research up there in a couple of years, get back up in the Northwest Passage, because there's a lot of unmapped areas in the Northwest Passage. And I just would love to be back up there personally. But the Canadian area has a lot more bureaucracy. Now, as far as who owns the data, every piece of data that we've ever collected ever, because we are a nonprofit organization, is available to the public. It is all public source. So the first thing that happens, well, actually, technically, the Danish Hydrographic Office does get the data, but the American government gets it before they do, because we have to. There's a program called RATS, and RATS is an acronym. I couldn't even tell you what it is. I just had to reapply for it the other day. But the US government basically says, hey, we want to see it before anybody else does, more or less. Although all of this, from the scientific perspective, all of this has at least a 1-year delay, if not more. So you, the general public, are not going to be able to see it for at least a year. And what it does for us is it allows us to publish scientific papers with that data before another scientist. If it was instantly available, then some scientist somewhere else could take our data that we collected and publish their papers with our data. So now it's a race. The race is on. We've got to use the data and publish it before it becomes publicly available to other scientists.
Got it. And I think I just saw somebody raise their hand. Let's see what I got over here. Oh, raised hands. I don't have you over here. Okay. I'm going to ask you a basic question. What made you decide to go into ocean research in the first place, and why use a sailboat?
Well, a sailboat can operate, it depends on where you're at, right? If you're in a Chesapeake Bay, I mean, theoretically, you could use a canoe and go out there and take a water sample. But the average cost of a traditional research vessel is about $25,000 a day. Up in the Arctic, and that's average. Up in the Arctic, it's closer to $50,000 a day. The icebreaker Odin, which is a Swedish research vessel, is $500,000 a day. That I don't know what that what's that British one? The Sir, that was supposed to be Bodie McBoatface. It's like the Sir Richard Attenborough. I have no idea. It's probably like a 2 million a day or something, right? So we can operate at less than 10% of the traditional costs. And the Sikuliak, I told you about that that engineer who fell and hurt his arm.
Sure.
The Sikuliak was a boat he worked on. Because he's the engineer, he was able to tell me what they burn a day. They burn 2,000 gallons of diesel every single day on that boat. So we will burn 2,000 gallons in an entire expedition if we're lucky. So the technologies needed to do scientific research have got smaller and less power hungry. We can now do research on a sailboat today we couldn't have done 20 years ago. Imagine 20 years from now, particularly when we integrate the fully autonomous aerial and underwater data collecting robots, the drones in the air with scientific equipment, the underwater vehicles with various sensors and probes. And we could be a great support platform for those technologies. This isn't just about me with my one boat. I am trying to build a global fleet of research-ready sailboats, making scientific research in the ocean more accessible, particularly in remote areas, but also cost-friendly and environmentally friendly. So that's why we use a sailboat. Why I did it is because when I got back sailing around the Americas, I knew I was never going to stop sailing. It was too deep in my blood. I was 31 years old, and what am I going to do? I mean, I'm 31, I'm young enough. I could go try to be the first to do this, and the first to do that, and the first to do this, and first to do that. But I don't know, it just seemed kind of hokey. I did cruising before. I sailed from Annapolis to Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, and back single-handed. I liked it. It was fun. But, I didn't want to spend my entire life just sailing around for the sake of sailing around. So I knew I was young enough and I was in a position where I could try to create an organization that would allow me to continue sailing while do it in a way that gives back to the ocean, which the ocean has given me a lot, sort of mentally and spiritually and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's a great answer. Hey, Gerardus has asked this question a couple times. Did the multi-beam keep you awake? Was it noisy?
No, it wasn't, because it depends on the frequency.
Does it?
That particular multi-beam was very expensive because it's a new one that has a wide variety of frequencies.
Yeah.
But most of those frequencies were not audible to the human ear. Now, if you get down on the single beam, when you get down to like 50 hertz, you can hear a clicking, but it's in a V berth. I don't sleep in a V berth. My crew does.
So who cares? We're good.
Yeah, who cares?
So we're good.
Honestly, the engine noise when motoring doing this would also blot out the sound.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the multi-beams don't run at such a frequency of 50, because then the transducers would be like 50 feet long. It'd be ridiculous for 1,029 beams.
I like it.
But
Good.
yeah, it depends on frequency.
I have one here from Jeroen. You said you sailed south of the Horn because you had to. Is it safer to sail through the Strait of Magellan?
Yeah, because you're not sailing, you're motoring for the most part. The Strait of Magellan is like the ICW for Cape Horn, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to go around Cape Horn if I was going to sail around the Americas nonstop single-handed, because it's part of the Americas.
Yeah.
And if you don't, plus how am I going to get through Straits of Magellan? I had a broken engine. I was on a 27-foot boat and I wasn't allowed to stop. If I dropped an anchor, it would have ruined my trip. I'm a person who believes that if you do a nonstop circumnavigation, you cannot drop an anchor, which goes against the GGR and a whole bunch of other people who say you can drop an anchor, which doesn't make any sense to me, because if you drop an anchor, you are not a vessel underway, according to the International Maritime Rules of Navigation. So yeah, I had to go around Cape Horn.
Well, you have had a litany of woe trying to get yourself up there last summer. I remember being docked next to you in Annapolis last summer, and my God, you were scrambling to get hauled out. You were scrambling to get, and it looks like it kept on going all the way up there. So it was pretty amazing. And then here's a general question. Any observations about the state of ice and glaciers as related to global warming?
Luckily, my organization, being a research organization, doesn't have to get into the sort of the political side of it.
Yeah.
So we don't have to get into whether it's man-made or not. I have my own personal opinions about it, but generally speaking, I think man-made climate change was real only because the scientists do. I'm not a scientist. Yeah. If there was an issue with my engine, I would agree with the majority of mechanics. I'm not a mechanic, But anyways, I don't care about the politics at some level. There are plenty of satellite information, which is just limited really within the time span of satellites, that have shown a major decrease of ice within the Arctic, the whole Arctic ice cap. And of course, glaciers, look at Glacier National Park in the United States. They have stakes in the ground with different years on it, marking the retreat of that glacier. Almost every glacier on Earth is retreating and disappearing right now. Yeah. So it's happening. Now, there have been 17 ice ages in the last million years. Obviously, it comes and goes. A very interesting thing about studying glaciers right now is that when these glaciers disappear in the next 100 years, 200 years, whatever it is, they're not coming back until the next ice age. How long is that going to be? Is it going to be 10,000 years, 5,000, 15,000?
I'm not going to be here to see it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and 500 years from now, they're not going to be able to study glaciers anymore, because all they're going to have is these muddy rivers. Yeah. And what is all that mud going to do to the polar regions when now you have all this stuff all this sediment getting dumped in the Arctic and the Antarctic? You think you're going to have penguins swimming around chasing fish in muddy water? Yeah. So, it's hard to say what's going to happen. Now, this has happened before at some level. 3 million years ago, there was no ice, and the sea levels were about 150, 180 feet higher than they are today. Yeah, you bet. So it happens. But is it man-made or not? Well, you can, whatever. I don't care. You can think whatever you want to think.
It's happening.
Well, it does and it doesn't, right? It does and it doesn't. So whatever.
Okay. Amy Purvis asks you, can you describe your next research adventure?
We'll be heading back to Greenland. There's a bunch of fjords in southern Greenland, actually south of where we were, they're very important. They have very active glaciers and a ton of ice that are uncharted. And we're going to continue doing that research there. And even though it's south of that area, it is full of ice. As glaciers move faster and as they melt, they produce more icebergs because they're just making more babies. They're moving quicker and quicker, making more and more ice.
Yeah.
So that's why we got to put the transducer in the hull, is because we're going to be pushing into some fjords. They're going to be like that ice machine was last year, that it's just going to be chocked full of ice, where we could never map it out if we had it on an appendage on the front of the boat.
Yeah, I totally
and I've been to almost all of West Greenland because I've been there quite a few times now.
Yeah.
I've been as far north as you can go twice. I've been all over it. So I've never been to this part. Problem with that part is there's a lot of mosquitoes. You go north, there's not. I mean, I'm talking like millions. We're going into like mosquito, madness, basically.
Mosquito heaven.
So, I have a pilot house, which does protect us from the mosquitoes, but you go outside the lower probe, it can get or go for a hike or something like that. But anyways, whatever, who cares? I don't care about the mosquito.
God. All right, I'm going to wrap you up in just a second. And Austin says, hey, man, I hope your trip is going well and you found milk and turntables. How do you go about keeping your morale up on these long trips? Listening to your podcasts, it seems like it ebbs and flows, but what do you do when you feel down?
Yeah, well, determination. There's a Calvin Coolidge quote. I think he was a president before Abraham Lincoln. I won't get into the whole thing, but basically he ends it by saying determination and perseverance alone are omnipotent, or determination and perseverance alone are what matters in life. And he goes on saying it doesn't matter if you're smart, it doesn't matter if you're talented, it doesn't matter whatever. All that matters is you have perseverance and determination.
And you keep going.
I feel that my entire organization that I've spent over 10 years building and done numerous difficult expeditions is in the balance when we do these expeditions. Everything we've worked for, the entire future, everything I'm trying to work for is in the balance. We have to be successful. So definitely have difficult times with some of the various situations, whether it's an issue with the boat, whether it's issue with crew, whether it's issue with whatever. And you're spending months at a time stuck on a boat with the same people. It can be difficult. And luckily last year we didn't have any ego. Ego typically creates drama. So when you're picking crew, you got to try people with the least amount of ego humanly possible. And then when I got back from that expedition, I'd worked so hard for years getting up to, building a boat, the chaos, all this, that, getting up there, doing it, working hard, that I kind of crashed for a little while there and just burned out. And then I'm glad I'm down here now doing this because it's helped me, I'm just writing a book at this point. And yes, I do have some turntables and I did find some leche. And a nice Colombian girl who showed me where to get it. So it's been going, man. It's going pretty good. I can't lie. Absolutely. But I mean, anything, trip around the Americas or whatever. I mean, you're going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to have ups and downs, but you have to remain determined. And it's only really through determination, and it exists inside of every one of us, that you are going to accomplish your goals. How bad do you want it? How bad do you want your goals? And how important are they to you? And are you willing to put everything you have into creating them? And if you are, then you're not going to let anything stop you.
Good for you. And I totally get that. Matt, this has been wonderful. And I want to thank you so much for spending time with us from Bogota, Colombia, for crying out loud. I didn't even know electrons could go that far.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, my friend. And I'll look forward to seeing you back in Annapolis. I'm going to do the uprigging. If you're here, come to the uprigging. Be good.
And when can people see the recording there, Duncan? How can people see this?
That's a great question. So this whole session is being recorded, and that will probably be up on our websites by tomorrow afternoon. Takes a little while for it to get processed. Matt, I'm going to send you a link because I think that'll be easier for you than sending the raw footage. So that should be under control and up. You'll find it at gcbsr.org. Great Chesapeake Bay schoonerrace.org is where you'll find it first. And it's gcbsr.org/stories. So that's where you'll see it. And Matt, thanks a million. Great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank everybody for watching, and I will Yeah, I'll talk to you guys on the Single Handed Sailing podcast in another week or so, or whatever. Next
We'll
time I
look
talk to
forward to it.
Duncan.
All right,
All
Matt.
right.
Sleep
Sounds
tight.
good.
Thanks
Okay,
everybody
yep.
for joining us. We'll see you later. Bye-bye. Yay.